all of us an overview of the history which Franciscan friars share in the United States. From the beginning of the history of Franciscans in the United States, two themes have guided us: to proclaim the gospel to those who have never heard it, and to accompany those on the margins. As for proclaiming the gospel, the Regula Beata approved by Pope Honorius in 1223 was the first religious rule in the history of the Church to include evangelization as an element of community life. And that evangelization was connected to the whole community through the minister provincial. For friars who go and for friars who stay, we are all about evangelization. The other theme was put most precisely in the Regula non beata, to be with those on the margins, those despised, poor, powerless, sick, and unable to help themselves. The first missions in what is now the United States were not only the efforts of friars to share the gospel with Native Americans, but also, with the exception of Franciscans in Maryland, political ploys on the part of European powers, specifically Spain and France, to gain advantage in the building of their global empires. So friars went with the Spanish to Georgia, Florida, New Mexico, Texas, and finally California, while the French were in Maine, the upper Mississippi Basin, and Louisiana. English friars served in Maryland for over 40 years. Though the Jesuits may have been famous for their missionaries in New France and Maryland, the most famous missionary of colonial times was our brother, San Junipero Serra. As colonial Franciscan missions were part of the geopolitical efforts of Spain and France to build their empires, when those efforts suffered defeat, first at the hands of the English, and later when Mexico gained its independence from Spain, Franciscan missions became like sands in an hourglass. The only direct link today with those colonial efforts is Mission Santa Barbara in California. Due to the appointment of Fray Francisco Garcia Diego y Moreno as Bishop of ambos Californias, Alta and Baja, friars gathered around him in Santa Barbara and never left, despite having to give up all their other missions. By this time, a new era was about to begin, as Franciscans accompanied those coming to America at the bottom of society. Immigrants, whether they arrived at Ellis Island in the early 20th century like the children pictured here, or a century later crossing the Rio Grande into Texas, immigrants in the U.S. have always been on the margins, and Franciscans have been with them. The earliest immigration-era Franciscans came one by one. Michael Egan and Louis Huber made individual contributions. Then William Untertiner and Otto Jair arrived in groups. The world into which these friars came was not friendly. Catholics were seen as a threat to Protestant America in the 19th century. They were thought to be the agents of a foreign power, the papacy, which intended to destroy the American way of life. The most common pattern of Franciscan friar arrival in the U.S. was at the invitation of Catholic bishops looking for ministers. From Buffalo, New York, Bishop John Timon traveled to Italy looking for professors. Pamphilo de Magliano led a group of friars from Rome to open and staff a college seminary in Olean, New York. Bishop Henry David Juncker of Alton, Illinois, traveled to Europe and persuaded Gregor Janknecht, the provincial of the Franciscans in Saxony, to send a group of friars to serve German-speaking Catholic immigrants in Illinois. When Pamphilo de Magliano and his brothers opened that school for Bishop Timon in Olean, they had no idea that they were laying the foundation for two future Franciscan provinces. Bishop John Baptist Purcell repeatedly urged friars from the Tyrol, that German-speaking area overlapping Austria, Switzerland, and Italy, first to come and then to stay, to serve Catholics in Cincinnati. They planted deep roots and established the first Franciscan custody in the United States in 1859. The friars from Saxony, arriving a few at a time at this point, also planted deep roots with the foundation of an educational institution in Quincy, Illinois. Thus, 4 Franciscan provinces made important educational commitments early on in their U.S. histories. But the Kulturkampf, the struggle for culture, which took place in the newly unified German Empire of the 1870s, changed the way German-speaking Franciscan friars came to the United States. Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor of Germany, was determined to do away with useless Catholic religious men and women. Gregor Jannek sent over 100 friars and candidates from Saxony to join their brothers in the Midwest on one ship. At the same time, friars from Fulda came to New Jersey. With the addition of all those friars in 1875, the commissariat in the Midwest of the United States became the province of the Sacred Heart in less than 5 years. Otto von Bismarck had literally pointed the way for Franciscans to leave Germany and come to the U.S. Friars had been in Santa Barbara since 1786, but they went through lots of changes. With the annexation of California by the United States in 1846, their connections to Mexico became tenuous. They founded the Apostolic College of Our Lady of Sorrows in the 1850s, which allowed them to receive novices, and after the California Gold Rush, they received Irish immigrants into the community, but continued to struggle, and by the 1880s, their situation seemed quite bleak. One friar at Mission Santa Barbara wrote to the Minister General expressing concern about their Franciscan life. Ferdinand Bergmeyer of Sacred Heart Province was sent to the old mission to investigate. When other friars from Sacred Heart joined him, they guaranteed that the 99-year tradition of Franciscans in Santa Barbara would continue as the place of longest continuous Franciscan presence in the United States. When the new West Coast province was formed in 1915, it was appropriately named St. Barbara Province. Also in the 1880s, friars arrived among Polish immigrants in Wisconsin, inspired by Augustin Zeitz, an extraordinarily talented and determined lay brother. Their initial efforts met with little success. As the result of disputes within the community, Augustin Zeitz left for Sacred Heart Province, joined by a number of other lay brothers. Eventually, the whole community was placed under the supervision of Sacred Heart Province, until it re-emerged as an independent province in 1939. Italian immigration to the United States began a 20-year-long explosion in 1890, resulting in new needs for ministry. Italian friars had come in the 1850s and founded St. Bonaventure College, where Irish students also joined Immaculate Conception Custody. The custody's ministry expanded to New York City, so when friars from Fulda arrived as a result of the Kulturkampf, they joined Immaculate Conception Custody. By 1901, this amalgamation of Italians, Irish, and Germans was considered unwieldy. Aloysius Lauer, the Minister General of the newly united Order of Friars Minor, sent David Fleming to deal with the situation. Fleming separated the German and Irish friars from the Italians to form Holy Name Province, leaving the Italian friars with the original name and status of Immaculate Conception Custody, and with lots of immigrant ministry to do. The Italian friars in their ministry, working to fulfill the needs of nearly 3 million Italian immigrants who arrived and largely stayed in the cities of the Northeast between 1880 and 1910. St. Catherine Drexel founded the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament for the specific purpose of ministry among blacks and Native Americans. She was determined to open a school on the Navajo reservation. She wanted priests and brothers to minister alongside her sisters, and made unsuccessful efforts to get priests and brothers to undertake a mission to the Navajo. Then she spoke with the Franciscans of St. John the Baptist province, promising to fund the mission and giving assurances that the Navajo, through long association with Mexicans, had all learned to speak Spanish. The Cincinnati Friars decided to head west. But the Friars found no Spanish-speaking Navajo, and instead began the difficult task of learning a non-European language. Father Berard Hiley became the first person ever to record the language and preserve Navajo stories, chants, and prayers, which had previously been handed on only orally. He embodied the Franciscan adage, "If you wish to be heard, first you must listen." The Kulturkampf gave 19th century U.S. Franciscans a German accent. At the start of World War I, German was a common language used in Holy Name, Sacred Heart, St. Barbara, and St. John the Baptist provinces. But the war killed the desire to be associated with anything German, even in such German strongholds as Cincinnati, Milwaukee, and St. Louis. Not since the Civil War ended 80 years earlier had the people of the United States experienced a war which touched the lives of so many so directly as did World War II. This total war effort was unprecedented in immediate extent and in its long-lasting effects. This war changed the world forever. As it began, Polish cavalry attempted to fight German tanks, but it ended when the United States dropped atomic bombs on Japanese cities. In 6 years, the world went from horsepower to atomic energy. World War II made it seem necessary, natural, and right to be part of something bigger than myself. For some, that something bigger was the expanding material prosperity of the U.S. The U.S. Catholic Church also expanded as parishes multiplied, filled with baby boomers and their proud parents. Involvement in the Church also reflected a real need to be part of something life-affirming after the incomprehensible death and destruction of the war. But the war also left fear and uncertainty about the presence of evil in the world, which could triumph over good. The nation and the Church needed heroes. The chalice pictured here is the ordination chalice of Father Larry Schreiber of Guadalupe province. Ordained in 1960, his mother decided that the most valuable jewel she had to donate for his chalice was the Purple Heart she had received from a grateful nation when Larry's older brother was killed in the war. God and country seemed united in purpose in this golden era. So national defeats, such as the loss of China and Eastern Europe to the communists, were seen as defeats for the Church as well. With the loss of China missions, the friars turned to new mission fields. 3 provinces, Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary, St. John the Baptist, and St. Barbara, sent missionaries to the Philippines, who contributed greatly to the eventual founding of San Pedro Batista province in 1983. Friars from Sacred Heart province went to the Amazon basin in 1942 for ministry in rubber-producing areas vital to U.S. war efforts. After the war, their mission continued for more than 50 years and included working to develop a native Franciscan presence, which grew into the custody of St. Benedict of the Amazon. Through the 1950s and 1960s, and to this day, Friars of Immaculate Conception province serve in Central America, as well as in Toronto, Canada. Currently, Roberto Gonzalez, a member of Holy Name province, is the Archbishop of San Juan, Puerto Rico. As a result of their ministry, friars of 6 of the 7 U.S. provinces have been named bishops in mission territories, often serving as the founding bishops of dioceses. The 1950s saw rapid growth in Franciscan seminaries all over the United States, but the growth masks other developments. While the number of friars in the 1950s grew impressively, when compared with the U.S. Church in general, the friars did not keep up. Not with the number of Catholics, not even with the numbers of priests and seminarians. It seems that while the Catholic community was moving up in American society, joining the Franciscans in the 1950s, especially espousing voluntary poverty, just did not seem very American. For the first time since European immigration began, joining the Franciscans was not a way for promising young men to step up in society. Ironically, the 1950s golden era of the immigrant and outsider Catholic Church in the United States came to an end in a moment of triumph. For the first time ever, it appeared that every opportunity open to others in the United States was now open to Catholics. The Catholic 1950s truly ended at Vatican II, for the Church and for U.S. friars. No one seemed to have answers anymore, but instead the Church itself called for unsettling change in the midst of unsettled times. With racial tensions, the sexual revolution, and the war in Vietnam growing concerns for everyone, right and wrong no longer seemed as clear as they had only 20 years earlier during World War II. Change was going to be painful and costly. Internal schools disappeared in every province. Their closures made the transmission of the Franciscan intellectual tradition to young friars and others one of the great challenges of our time, even as interest in rediscovering our Franciscan heritage grew among us and in the culture at large. A graph of 4% on a pie chart looks like a dagger to the heart, which, with 4% of the clergy historically being accused of sexual abuse, is exactly what clergy sexual abuse has been in the Church. This great scandal has changed our lives and will continue to be a reason for us to redouble our efforts to protect the innocent and reflect on how we live chastity as friars far into the future. But clergy sexual abuse is but one of many serious issues facing us. We live in a violent society, racked by the breakdown of the social networks which once held us together. We know that consumerism, materialism, and individualism all contribute to that breakdown of social networks, and all of this is happening on a planet where life as we know it is itself threatened by environmental destruction. How will we proclaim the gospel to a culture that does not seem to want to hear it? How will we accompany the growing number being cast to the margins around the world? What is our vocation now? Once, when asked about the vocation crisis, Sean Collins, an Irish friar serving as general definitor, said, "If we think of the friars as the workforce which will build the kingdom of God, there will never be enough of us. But if we realize that the friars are a band of brothers who are here to help one another and others find the kingdom of heaven in our midst, God will always send exactly what we need." The demographic reality is that with small Catholic families, youthful vocations are not going to be encouraged by parents who dream of grandchildren. Without large numbers of young men coming to us in the near future, we must help our own vocations grow. In the picture on the left, Pope Francis greets the friars in a tradition that goes all the way back to Francis of Assisi. Pope Francis told us how to renew the Franciscan vocation first endorsed by his predecessor, Pope Innocent. Our vocation will be renewed by fidelity to the gospel and the church, by poverty and humility, and fidelity to each other as brothers. Pope Francis said that the people love us. With that reassurance, we can take steps toward renewal. We have been collaborating for a long time, most recently and significantly in formation, but also in work regarding issues of justice, peace, and the integrity of creation, in vocation recruitment, missions, and retreats for the friars themselves. John Vaughan put it well. Friars do not exist to serve structures. Structures exist to serve the fraternal life and ministry of the friars. Whether we work at it together or as individual provinces, we all face the need to restructure because we simply cannot sustain our current structures, no matter how well they served us in the past. The image is a detail from a mural in the refectory of an apostolic college in Mexico. There, young friars were inspired to go to the missions, to the margins, and to proclaim the good news. Then, as now, when we do these things, we truly become friars minor. Gospel, fraternity, and mission. All of us share hundreds of years, thousands of friars, and millions of miracles from our Franciscan history in the United States.